and welcome to the very first House of Rocks Productions, Episode 1 of Haunted History of the Chippewa Valley and Beyond. Are you ready? My name is Tiff, and I've been investigating and researching the unexplained for over 20 years. Growing up in a large haunted Victorian home will inspire some interest in the unseen. As I began to do more research on people and places, it caused me to really enjoy the historical aspects as well. After 20 years of having to deal with his kooky aunt, my nephew Presley has also found a love of the paranormal. We're really excited to share with you some history, but with a twist. We decided our first episode should take place in our hometown, Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. We'll be bringing you bits of history sprinkled with paranormal stories and lore. We'll give you glimpses into some of our investigations and peeks into places people don't always get access to. Beyond the countless hours buried in research, we'll also be calling on fellow historians and a few extraordinary friends with talents that reach far past the living. Yes, even into the realm of those who have crossed over. Full disclosure, I began to learn about the subject of this episode years ago before Presley joined me, so I'm going to take the reins on this one. Turn the lights down low and grab your favorite blankie and get comfy. Come with me on an adventure into the lives of Nellie and Leslie Wilson during their time in Chippewa Falls. My journey with the Wilsons began in their home. I saw where they hosted community parties and balls that were the talk of the town. I saw where they had family meals and laid their heads at night. I went to the huge mercantile they built. After decades of sitting empty, it was recently purchased by the Wisconsin Farmers Union and completely renovated. I think the Wilsons would be so happy that in some ways the building is going back to its roots and will be used to feed people again. So I got to see the gigantic floor scales to weigh bulk product, the freight elevator that I got to ride in before it was removed, and the really cool old vaults. My journey ended at their chapel in the cemetery that doubles as their mausoleum. A few years ago, the family that now owns the Wilson home had contacted the paranormal group I was in for some help. Out of respect for the family, I will not be going into detail on the experiences that were happening in the home. I will just say that the kids were affected, and anything affecting children becomes a priority. We visited the home a couple of times, bringing Bambi and Adrian, who are the two team members who are intuitive. We picked up a small child in the ballroom in the top floor of the home, and even Nellie's nurse in the room she stayed in on the second floor. Nothing negative. Plus, what do you have to be negative about when you're residing in a gorgeous Victorian mansion that you don't even have to pay rent to reside in? Speaking of this beautiful home, let me tell you a little bit more about it. It was built by William McCord, who was a lumberman and the first director of the Lumbermen's Bank downtown. He had expensive taste, clearly, and he could afford to. His little slice of heaven boasted 3 living rooms, 5 fireplaces, stained glass over the landing on the grand staircase. And did I mention the ballroom on the top floor? I think I did. But I didn't mention the bowling alley that was in the basement. Now, the McCords and the Wilsons probably didn't put in the bowling alley. That came later. They did, however, put in an intricate web of tubing in the walls that allowed communication from any room to the kitchen. This is just scratching the surface, but you get the idea. McCord seems to have gotten into some shady business dealings and needed to sell the house and leave town. It worked out great for the Wilsons, who snapped this beauty up. After spending so much time researching, I learned so much about Leslie and Nellie Wilson that I felt like I knew them. The house has great and welcoming energy, not surprising considered they were very generous and beloved members of society in the late 1800s and well into the 1900s. But all I know at this point in my adventure is that I'm in a gorgeous Victorian home with great energy. Journey with me down the rabbit hole of learning more about the Wilsons. In 1862, at the age of 15, Leslie Wilson moved with his parents from Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania, to the far western land of Hastings, Minnesota, and soon after that to Winona. Leslie became involved with the Eau Claire Lumber Company and moved to Eau Claire. The company ended up closing not long after. Leslie took a job with Bell, Conrad and Company out of Chicago and became a traveling salesman of spices, teas, and coffee. He kept his home in Eau Claire since he was gone traveling the Midwest to sell his wares. On September 16, 1884, Leslie marries his wife, Nellie of Eau Claire, and in 1889 moved to Chippewa Falls. Fun fact, Nellie's maiden name was Willson with one L. Leslie immediately began organizing the mercantile and assembled officers for the company. Judge R.D. Marshall realized the need for a larger mercantile building in town, so he built one. The Marshall Building still stands on East Central Street downtown. It housed the mercantile, businesses, living spaces, and a few county offices. In 1901, the mercantile was still going strong and renting more and more space in the building. They even got a contract that was awarded to the mercantile to supply tea, coffee, spices, and groceries to the Chippewa Falls Home for the Feeble-Minded, also known as the Northern Colony. In 1901, Leslie was also the president of the Progressive League. He contacted Andrew Carnegie asking for a grant for a new library during this time. Because of this, Chippewa Falls received $20,000 from Andrew Carnegie for a library building, as long as the city pledges $2,000 of its own money for its upkeep. And so it was. In 1902, the city built its beautiful and iconic library behind the Presbyterian Church, where Family Fare grocery store now is. You heard me. I said it was. It did exist. It was torn down to build a modern and handicap-accessible library across the street. While I do understand needing a modern library, losing the Carnegie Library to me was a tragedy. In 1903, the mercantile was quickly outgrowing the building, and Leslie thought it wise to move to River Street along the Chippewa River and across the street from the Union Train Depot. It couldn't be more convenient than having shipments delivered almost directly to your door. Look out, Amazon. Leslie brought in the same architect who built the Carnegie Library, F. L. Orff of Minneapolis, to build the new mercantile on River Street in August 1903. Tragedy strikes unexpectedly, and in December of 1906, Leslie passes away. The town goes into mourning, and businesses even close down on the day of his funeral out of respect. Nellie is now on her own to run the mercantile. To illustrate what a big deal it is for a woman to run a business 100 years ago, Kate Sheely was in a battle with the city to simply keep her liquor license for her saloon after her husband James passed away. These women lost their husband within 3 years of each other. Kate ended up finally getting the liquor license because she leased out the saloon portion of her boarding house. We've all heard the stories of the Sheely house being a house of ill repute. No one knows if it's true or not, but I'd bet that it is. No judgment here. These widows had to survive in a man's world. The women's liberation movement was still 50 years away. Nellie had been running the business alongside her husband for many years anyway. She could definitely handle running it alone, and she did. Just like women who worked in the fields on top of taking care of duties in the home, we had to be able to do it all, and we had to do it well. In 1916, tragedy strikes for Nellie again. A fire destroys the mercantile and the merchandise. Nellie immediately rebuilds a bigger and better building. In 1921, Nellie is elected to the board of the State Historical Society. Women barely had the right to vote at this time, but Nellie was described as decidedly a businesswoman. By 1924, she was also on the board of directors for the Handmade Shoe Company. Nellie was also a member of the Business and Women's Club for several years. Nellie ran the business for nearly 30 years until she passed away on February 16, 1934. It was finally time for me to visit the Wilsons. I called up a couple friends from the Historical Society, and we visited Nellie and Leslie in their final resting spot. After Leslie died in 1906, Nellie built what would become their final resting place, but also a space the community could use. Designed by J.N. Sullivan from Minneapolis, it was modeled after the Parthenon. Built of marble and Colfax stone, it can hold 50 people in the chapel area if needed for small services. The walls inside are lined up to about 6 feet high with white subway tile. The Wilson Chapel was used as such until Nellie also passed in 1934, and both Nellie and Leslie are resting there together. Another useful feature of the chapel is what lies beneath. There's a crypt underneath where bodies could be stored over the winter until they could be properly buried when the ground thawed. This space can hold 30 bodies and up to 60 if needed. In thinking about all the Wilsons did for our town in the name of progress, I imagine them being so happy that new life is being breathed back into the building they built over 100 years ago. I can't imagine Nellie and Leslie wouldn't check in at Market on River regularly to make sure Farmers Union is taking care of the legacy they've left in Chippewa Falls in that huge, sturdy building. I can attest to the fact that it was very important to the Wisconsin Farmers Union to preserve and respect as much of the history and the building as possible while still making the building usable and updated. The first floor offers multiple dining options and shops. The second floor has more shops and the Farmers Union offices. The third floor is apartments. I have so much respect for the way that the Farmers Union went about revitalizing this building. However, there's one thing that bothers me. I really want to know if Nellie and Leslie come to visit, and they will not spill the tea. You remember Bambi that went through the Wilsons' home with me, right? Well, we decided to meet for lunch one day at Market on River. I was really excited because I had been through the building before, during, and after the renovations. Bambi had never been here yet. So we decided to meet for lunch, and she kept telling me that she kept seeing a Native American. She said this more than once, and considering all the natives that were in the area, I really didn't think anything of it. As we were finishing our meal and getting ready to leave, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I remembered an article I found buried in a newspaper that's now 121 years old. It was a memory shared by Thomas McBean, and the incident he shared had happened 55 years before this. Let me paraphrase the memory as told by him and using his wording. A Frenchman named Cazenobia, visiting from Galena, was getting drunk on firewater and wandered to a nearby wigwam. Several times he tried demanding entry and was denied. Cazenobia wouldn't give up and became verbally abusive to the inhabitants. In an attempt to protect his squaw, the Indians stabbed Cazenobia. He was carried off to the home of Tim Hurley, who opened the first saloon in the settlement. All the men who were present shouted that the Indian must be hanged and headed towards the wigwam with a rope. A noose was thrown around his neck and the end thrown over the tree branch. H.S. Allen tried to talk down all the drunken insanity, but no one would listen. As McBean states, the poor unfortunate Indian was jerked into eternity. There would be retribution from the tribe. A band of 1,500 natives showed up demanding the surrender of the murderers, or else they'd burn the settlement to the ground. H.S. Allen and his wife once again stepped in. It was agreed that the ringleaders would be tried and punished in accordance with the laws of the settlement. They were all loaded onto boats heading to Prairie du Chien for their day in court. Each boat had Indian guards to make sure that no one tried to escape. As they got near a tribe of Sioux, their mortal enemies, the Indians dove out of the boat and left the men on their own. When they landed in Prairie du Chien, they did surrender. Their brave escorts ended up back in Chippewa Falls, and the Frenchman that started all the trouble survived his wound and left the country. The pine tree that ended the life of the native protecting his home stood for many years. Thomas said every time he saw it, he remembered the poor man buried right beneath it. So they hung this poor Native American right where the Mercantile Building now stands, and he's buried there. I guess I'd haunt the place too. This place really does have good energy, and maybe that's from the group of 4 or 5 men that she saw, dressed in attire from the early 1900s. With the clothes, hats, and mustaches, that was her best guess. They looked very interested in everything that was going on in the building. I'm not saying this place is haunted. I love my girl B. But you have to take everything with a grain of salt when it comes from someone who talks to the dead. Don't worry, she would tell you that herself. Regardless of if the Wilsons or others visit this location, their story and their legacy is what should be remembered. The Mercantile Building lived several lives after Nellie passed away. The Wilsons didn't have any children, so the business was left to Nellie's sole surviving sibling, her sister Catherine, who lived in Los Angeles. Catherine had no interest in becoming a Wisconsinite. She sold the business to Harold P. Jameson from Rice Lake. He renamed it Chippewa Valley Grocer, which it stayed until 1948. It was then sold to the Chippewa Shoe Company in November of 1948, and up until its last renovations, you could still find sewing machine needles between the boards in the old wooden floor. This city had some generous and forward-thinking pioneers. If I could go back in time, there are so many people I'd want to meet, and the Wilsons are at the top of the list. I really hope you enjoyed meeting them and getting to know them a little bit. Take a few minutes to visit the Willson Chapel at Forest Hill Cemetery. Sit on the steps and let Nellie and Leslie know how grateful you are for all they did for our city that still impacts our lives today. I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments, considering this is our first episode. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, as we'll be bringing you more haunted history of the Chippewa Valley and beyond.